Okay, thank you. Well, our last segment this afternoon is called Communicating Arctic Change, Innovative Approaches to Engagement, and I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Lawrence Hamilton. Larry's a Carsey Senior Fellow and Professor of Sociology at the University of New Hampshire. His work involves integrating data from social and natural sciences, such as in the Arctic, the human dimensions of climate change, and environmental sociology. And Larry has, over the years, done some really interesting survey work about people's attitudes towards such things as climate change, the Arctic, their knowledge about the Arctic, and so I'd like to invite him up here now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If this sounds good, I'll start out by saying now for something completely different. I gave the title What People Know, and by that I'm referring not to what scientists know and not to what Arctic residents know, but what do people who are not in the Arctic, the general U.S. public, know. I'm a sociologist by training, and I'm going to show you some results from a recent U.S. general public survey, specifically about the Arctic. Okay, apparently it's not clicking, so can we do the next slide? Many drivers of Arctic change come from outside the Arctic. So what people outside the Arctic think or know or imagine about the Arctic matters to the Arctic residents. And there have been a small number, you could count them on one hand, of general public surveys in the U.S. that have tried to assess what the public knows or thinks about the Arctic. First one of those was in 2006, and the most recent one was just completed in December of last year. This most recent one, which I'll be summarizing for you today, involved a random sample of about 1,400 people, roughly 1,000 of those from the 49 U.S. states and another 400 oversampled from Alaska. So for the first time, we're trying to figure out what Alaskans know. Next. A previous stage of the survey, just done immediately before the election in August of last year, the results have been published by the Carsey Institute, the Carsey School where I work, and anybody can download this if they'd like, or if you, really a lot of this stuff's been published. So if you see something go by too fast and you wish you had that information, write me a note and I can probably send you the files. Next, that was called Where is the North Pole? And you'll see why. Some questions about the Arctic, and these questions are pretty carefully written. So one of them reads something like, in a telephone interview, which of the following statements do you think is most accurate? That the area of ice covering the Arctic Ocean in late summer is less now than it was 30 years ago. And of course, having seen Peter's or Bob's slides, you know exactly what the answer to that is. It's very much less. Or, another choice, is it more now than it was 30 years ago? Or, thirdly, did it decline and then recover to about the same level as 30 years ago? And most people get that right. You can see the top bar here. Let's see if I can point. Yeah, almost 70% understand that the area of sea ice covering the Arctic Ocean in late summer is less than it was 30 years ago. You notice that's an example of our careful wording. There's some earlier surveys that would say something like, are the ice caps melting? And it's very unspecific about which ice caps in what season and so forth. So I try to give, I don't think it makes much difference to the general public, but it does make difference if you're going to claim that there's a right or a wrong answer to a question. Next question. Here's a much harder question, though, and that's a clue. This came up in both Peter's and Bob's talk. Which of the following would do the most to raise sea level if it happened? Melting the sea ice on the Arctic Ocean, melting land ice in Greenland, Antarctica, or melting glaciers in the Himalaya? And of course, the right answer is melting land ice in Greenland, Antarctica. That could contribute something over 200 feet if they both melted. But you can see only 40% of the people got that one, only 34% got that right. A larger fraction thought that it would be sea ice. Now, I'll say more about this in a minute, but here's the difference between the first question and the second. The first question, if you have some meme in your head about the Arctic ice is melting, that whispers in your ear what the right answer is. But knowing that Arctic ice is melting doesn't give you a clue what the right answer to this question is. You'd actually have to know some geography, and most people don't. Next item. Here's another trick question. This was the title for my paper. Where is the North Pole? Which of the following best describes the geography at the North Pole? Is it ice a few feet or yards thick covering a deep ocean? Is it ice more than a mile thick over land? Or is it a rocky mountainous landscape? And you can see that just a bit over 40% got that answer correct. And almost an equal number thought that it was ice over a mile thick over land. This despite the fact that every globe you've ever seen shows a big ocean up there in the Arctic, and probably back in 4th grade, most of us learned about the oceans and continents. Doesn't matter. And also notice that this is the same survey where 70% said that Arctic sea ice was melting. So they're not connecting these things. The knowledge is just a few feet or yards thick over a deep ocean, so to speak. Next slide. This is the hardest question I asked. We asked, which of the following countries has territory and thousands of people living north of the Arctic Circle? And the choices we gave them were the United States, which is the correct answer. There's a large fraction of Alaska north of the Arctic Circle. China, Estonia, I put that in, and I apologize for any Estonians in the audience, just because I am guessing most Americans have no clue where that is. Or Britain. And most people thought this was a trick question in which the answer was none of the above. So only 18% of our U.S. sample recognized that the U.S. has territory with thousands of people north of the Arctic Circle. And incidentally, you see at the bottom of all these slides, there's a DKNA that's don't know or give no answer. So people can say they don't know, but that's not a very popular choice. People would rather take a guess, or maybe they think they do know. Okay, next one. Now, it's not random. And I'll be the first to mention Donald Trump. He's the elephant in the room, and many people here have been thinking about him, probably quite a few cycles during the day. Most scientists will not raise that name because he's not in their data. He is in my data. He is absolutely unavoidable. Politics in general is the dominating division in survey data sets today. And to not tell you about that, I would be being deceptive, so I'm going to go there. The sea ice is less thing connects with people's beliefs about climate change. So there is about almost a 30-point gap between what Trump voters and all others. It turns out I can lump together the Clinton voters, the Sanders voters, the Jill Stein voters, the people who didn't vote. They're all not very different with regard to climate change. The Trump voters stand apart. So that's what I've done in this graph here. It's not Trump versus Clinton, it's Trump versus everybody else, including the people who didn't vote. And 77% of them think Arctic sea ice is less, only half the Trump voters do. And this is a basic physical observation, of course. Other questions, like the North Pole, where your convictions about global warming are not whispering in your ear, have much less of a political division. So there's really two kinds of knowledge. There's the kind that links to your ideology, to your personal beliefs, and that is going to follow the opinion leaders of your party and the news media that you trust and so forth. And there's another kind of knowledge, which is just basically, where is the North Pole? Your politics don't give you a clue, and people don't know that, and it's a much weaker political effect. So one of those reflects ignorance, the other reflects cultural cognition, the biased assimilation of information from different sources. For instance, the last one, territory. Who's got territory above the Arctic Circle? No political difference whatsoever, nor should there be. There's nothing in your politics that gives you the answer to that question. All right, next slide. Well, what about Alaskans? Are they any better with this stuff? Well, they are. All of these differences, the light bar is Alaska residents and the blue bar is other 49 states. In all of them, the Alaskans are better than lower 49 in accurately answering these Arctic questions. But it's not very impressive. At the top, we've got 83% of Alaskans compared with 69% otherwise know that sea ice is less. Well, that's pretty good. But only 63% of Alaskans know where the North Pole is. There's a little bit better guess among Alaskans about what would raise sea level. And rather astonishingly, only half of Alaskans know that the United States has territory and population above the Arctic Circle. And if you know Alaska, you understand why this is, because the population centers, all the McDonald's and everything else are well south of the Arctic Circle, and a lot of the people actually moved there from other parts of the U.S., and there's no particular reason why the great majority of Alaskans would ever travel into the Arctic. It doesn't connect by roads. It's just not part of their awareness. Okay, next slide. We asked some questions about what are important problems now that are caused by climate change. The leading candidate was weather effects. Sea level, which gets the most emphasis in a lot of scientific reports, was people don't think of that as something that's problematic now. I mean, in certain places it is, but for the most part they see that as something that's farther out in the future, whereas weather, they're hearing that from their TV weather people. I think that's the opening wedge of public awareness that climate might be bad for you. When you start hearing that this unusual warm December or extra tornadoes or other things you might be experiencing might in some way be connected with climate change. So we get 60% there. We've done some earlier studies. It's not the same survey as this, but one we did earlier just in New Hampshire, where we discovered that the temperature on the day which we ran the survey affected your answer about whether the Arctic was changing your weather. And the pattern here is that unusually cold or warm days, people were more likely to say, yes, Arctic change is going to affect my weather. Okay, next slide. Who do you trust for information? This is a key question in a lot of this work. Where on earth do you get these ideas? And the first question was, it's more words to it than that. It's scientists such as NASA who study the climate. So it's, again, pretty specific. And scientists will be encouraged to see that 72% said, yes, we trust scientists such as NASA who study the climate for information about climate change. Friends, we didn't really expect that. Friends and family is a big one. And this, I think, goes to the sort of multiplication effect of, that in everybody's group of family or friends, there are a few know-it-alls who will, tell you their opinions and the facts they just learned about climate change. And reaching those people has a magnifying effect on other people around the Thanksgiving table. So it's an interesting, a slightly different perspective than what I came into this with. Websites are, and this was worried, websites you follow, not just any old website. And likewise, religious leaders of your faith or political leaders of your party. And finally, Fox News. That's something I put in because I knew what would happen with it. So Fox News is trusted least and scientists the most. Next slide. High priority, and I guess I didn't include the political breakdown, but it's exactly what you would expect, that Fox News, the very most conservative people consider Fox News the second most reliable source of information immediately after scientists for information about climate change. And nobody else thinks that. What actions, this goes to a question that was asked of the previous panel, what actions do you think should have a high priority to reduce the risk of climate change? Well, people like renewable energy. That's a very popular answer. Behavioral and consumer changes to reduce energy consumption, fairly popular too. Cap and trade, and we have a little sentence explaining what this is, not so popular. And carbon tax, and we specified a revenue-neutral carbon tax in which revenue is returned to consumers. Even so, nobody likes that. Next slide. And here's how it breaks down politically. And what you see, each of those is a Democrats, independents, non-Tea Party Republicans, Tea Party Republicans split. And it's the same gradient on every one of them. The levels are different, but the gradient is very similar. And this is why I say it's in my data. I can't not talk about it. It shows up on almost anything I analyze. And you can see that a good takeaway, to say something positive for a change, is that Democrats and independents, all by both large majorities in both cases, favor renewable energy and lifestyle changes. Democrats, independents, and even non-Tea Party Republicans, we have half or more favoring renewable energy development. So that's as close as there comes to an apple pie issue. But the hardcore conservatives are having none of any of these. And again, that's fairly typical. Okay, I think that's my last slide. We'll go to the next one. And the next one, I think, is just a list of references. Next slide. Yes, which is too long for you to copy down, but just to make the point that if you're curious about this stuff, there's a lot written down and a lot I can share with you if anybody wants to send me an email. So thank you very much.